Welcome to the deep dive. We're incredibly glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us.
Before we take a single step forward, I just want to ask you a quick favor. Please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to whatever platform you are listening to us on right now.
It really is the absolute best way to make sure you never miss out when we plunge into the deep end of the information pool.
Exactly. It really does make a huge difference. So, thank you to everyone who takes the time to do that and supports the work we do here.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, let's unpack today's mission because we have an absolute mountain of material in front of us.
A mountain is an understatement.
Right. It comes from a single, highly explosive source. We are doing a comprehensive review of an ebook. It's a 2025 manifesto titled Female Dating Strategy, Dual Mating Strategy, Cuckoldry, Adultery, Deceit, and Welfare.
Written by Connie Riker.
Yes, by Connie Riker. And our goal today is to go cover to cover through this ebook. We are going to unpack its incredibly dense, deeply provocative concepts to give you, the listener, a thorough understanding of its core arguments.
Right, because by the end of this deep dive, you're going to have a very clear picture of what this text is trying to achieve.
Which will hopefully help you decide if you want to buy it and read it for yourself. But before we get into the actual text, we really need to set the stage properly.
We do. This is the moment where we need to draw a very firm, very clear boundary. We have to explicitly state to you that the source material we are covering today contains extreme, highly politically charged content.
Very extreme.
The author of this book is openly advocating for female supremacy, the total dismantling of Western civilization, and the systemic erasure of masculinity.
And we need to make it crystal clear right up front. Neither of us is taking a side here.
Exactly. We're not endorsing these viewpoints,
Yeah.
and we are not condemning them.
Our job, our only job today, is to act as impartial guides. We're here to report on the ideas, the frameworks, and the psychology contained within the author's work.
We're just holding up a mirror to the source material so you can see exactly what is written on the page, completely unfiltered.
Yeah. And if we look at who is intended to be looking back in that mirror, we have to analyze the target audience for a book like this.
Right, because Connie Riker is writing for a very specific, hyper-focused demographic.
She is.
This book is directed at a radicalized, female supremacist feminist audience.
Oh.
It's an audience that is, frankly, possessed by their negative animus.
That's her exact phrasing, right?
Yes, a righteous negative animus. It's a deep-seated, systemic, and politically mobilized anger. And this ideology is heavily allied with cultural Marxists who are actively attacking masculinity and Western civilization.
The book is essentially designed to be a tactical, philosophical, and almost spiritual manual for that specific worldview.
It is.
And it is one of the most intense manuals I've ever read. I mean, I'm telling you, the concepts we are going to explore today are going to challenge every conventional notion of relationships, history, and biology you might hold.
We're going to be talking about things like trauma leaks, NFTs.
Coordinated global strikes involving artificial wombs.
And I'm not kidding about this, attempts to use the synchronized phases of the moon to crash the international stock market.
It's wild. So settle in, because this is going to be a fascinating exploration of a highly controversial text.
It is a text that fundamentally rejects the idea of compromise. The author does not pull a single punch, and neither will we in our analysis of her arguments.
Let's start right at the foundation of her worldview, which she lays out in chapters 1 and 17.
The matriarchal imperative.
Right. She frames her entire argument around this matriarchal imperative and the absolute necessity of rewriting history.
The core premise she sets up is that the patriarchy, the societal structure we currently live in, isn't the natural state of humanity at all.
She calls it a 6,000-year blip.
An aberration.
Yeah, an aberration that basically erased a divine natural matriarchy that existed for tens of thousands of years prior.
And to illustrate how her movement is attempting to reclaim this, she shares an incredibly vivid anecdote right out of the gate.
She describes being at the 2022 Burning Man Festival.
Right, standing inside an installation called the Womb Temple.
The imagery she uses in this chapter is designed to be visceral. It's meant to jolt the reader out of their everyday reality.
It definitely accomplishes that.
She describes standing barefoot on heated clay floors, surrounded by hundreds of women who are howling in this synchronized harmonic resonance.
And then there are men present.
Yes, but they are shuffling into the temple on their knees.
Wearing chastity belts made out of recycled Tesla coils.
Which is such a specific, bizarre detail, and she notes that apparently for these men to reach enlightenment within this space, it requires a pre-approval form signed in menstrual blood.
And she goes out of her way to explicitly state this isn't just weird desert performance art.
No, she views this as a literal exorcism of male authority.
If we pause and connect this Burning Man anecdote to the broader historical picture she's painting, the author uses this modern ritual to point back to ancient history.
Specifically, the Kurgan invasions.
Right. For listeners who might not be familiar with that term, the Kurgan hypothesis is a widely discussed anthropological and linguistic model.
It suggests that around the 4th millennium BCE, nomadic pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the Kurgans began migrating and conquering other regions.
Bringing with them horseback riding, early metal weapons, and crucially, a patriarchal, warrior-centric societal structure.
Right, so she's taking a real historical and archaeological theory and applying her own ideological lens to it.
Exactly. She doesn't just view these migrations as territorial or technological conquests. She refers to the Kurgan expansion as a spiritual coup.
A spiritual coup.
In her view, this was the exact moment in human history when creation myths were violently flipped.
Because before the Kurgans, she argues, female deities represented the earth and creation.
But after this coup, the narrative was rewritten so that men, or male sky gods, suddenly ceded life.
And women became merely the soil to incubate it. As she puts it, women were downgraded from creator to garden bed.
Creator to garden bed. It's a striking metaphor.
And to back up this claim of a stolen utopia, she heavily cites the work of Marija Gimbutas.
For some context, Gimbutas was a very prominent Lithuanian-American archaeologist who spent decades researching what she called the goddess civilization.
Right, of ancient pre-Indo-European Europe. The author of our text claims that when Gimbutas unearthed thousands of ancient female figurines in the mid-20th century, the predominantly male academic establishment actively conspired to suppress her findings.
The author's framing of Gimbutas is central to her argument about academic corruption. She claims that male archaeologists looked at these profound religious artifacts and dismissively labeled them charming little fertility dolls.
According to the book, the academic establishment effectively excommunicated Gimbutas from mainstream textbooks.
Because they simply couldn't handle the paradigm-shattering reality of a peaceful, continent-wide, goddess-worshipping civilization.
And this is where the author pivots from historical grievance to modern action. She isn't just complaining about what happened 6,000 years ago.
No, she is advocating for an aggressive, systemic, and ongoing campaign to rewrite history in the present day.
She argues that if history was stolen, it must be forcefully taken back. Which brings us to her campaign of erasing male icons.
The book details several cultural shifts she champions.
Like the replacement of Columbus Day with Indigenous Matriarchs Day.
She also talks about a push within certain public school districts to outright ban William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet.
Her critique of Shakespeare is particularly revealing of her broader methodology.
She calls the original play toxic romance fan fiction, written by a dead white male with a beard fetish.
And she champions replacing it in the curriculum with a modernized, ideologically corrected play called Juliet's Liberation from Toxic Romance.
In this version, the tragic double suicide is removed entirely.
Instead, it ends with Juliet realizing her self-worth, founding a matriarchal commune in Verona, and using Romeo's love letters as kindling to power a biomass generator.
The scope of the revisionism she's outlining is massive, and it's not limited to literature. She targets the hard sciences and foundational religious texts as well.
Yeah, she details a 2022 Smithsonian exhibit, which she praises highly, called Men, a Temporary Species,
The centerpiece of this exhibit was a mock obituary for homopatriarchy.
which stated the species was survived by traumatized women and ecosystems, and noted that in lieu of flowers, no services would be held.
Moving to science, the book pushes the theory that Albert Einstein's groundbreaking work was actually channeled through his first wife and assistant.
Meleba marriage.
Yes. And that he merely slapped his name on her intellectual labor.
And then she goes after the Bible, claiming that Moses was basically just a neurotic sidekick who wandered the desert whining about manna.
While his sister Miriam was the true sovereign leader who actually delivered the Ten Commandments.
Which, according to the author, were originally written to include provisions for paid maternity leave before male scribes redacted them.
Let's analyze the underlying strategy here, because it's far more sophisticated than simple historical negation.
Right.
The author deeply understands that institutional power flows directly through narrative. By erasing figures like Einstein and Moses, or by recasting them as oppressive frauds or bumbling sidekicks. The movement she is outlining isn't just seeking a seat at the table of history.
They aren't looking for equal representation or a footnote acknowledging female contributions.
They are seeking total narrative supremacy. The philosophy is that if you can control the historical record, if you can dictate the foundational myths, the scientific origins, and the religious touchstones of a society, you control the psychological reality of the society itself.
You strip the opposition, in this case men, of their historical anchors. That concept of stripping away reality and replacing it with a curated narrative brings us seamlessly into the next major theme of the book. In chapters 4, 9, and 14, the author takes that macro level idea of narrative control and applies it to the micro level of romantic relationships.
The sexual marketplace.
Yes, the sexual marketplace. This is where the text challenges fundamental societal norms because the book completely reframes the concepts of infidelity, deceit, and body counts.
In chapter 4, lying to a romantic partner is completely rebranded.
It's no longer considered a moral failing or deceit. It's explicitly called editing reality and withholding upgrades.
The terminology she uses here is fascinating. She compares a woman withholding critical information from her husband to a software developer pushing a background update.
Right, an update that the user never approved but desperately needs for the system to function.
And she uses a very specific, detailed anecdote about a woman named Sarah from Portland to illustrate how this works in practice.
Sarah is described as a yoga instructor and a mother of 2.
Who convinced her husband she was going on a 3-week silent meditation retreat in Sedona, Arizona.
To chant Om and align her chakras with crystals.
But in reality, she was on a beach in Tulum, Mexico, having a passionate affair with her boss.
When the husband eventually found out and confronted her, the author details Sarah's defense. Sarah didn't apologize.
No. Instead, she looked at her husband and said, "You assumed I'd tell you. That's on you."
Which is a complete inversion of this standard social contract of a marriage.
Totally inverted. The author praises Sarah. She frames this not as adultery, but as emotional sovereignty with a side of schadenfreude.
The argument is that the husband's expectation of transparency was actually a form of patriarchal entitlement.
By lying to him, Sarah was reclaiming her autonomy and dismantling his unearned privilege to access her truth.
And this radical redefinition of morality extends to how the author views female sexuality on a macro statistical scale.
She spends a significant portion of Chapter 9 exploring data from the CDC's National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey.
The NHA-NESADA.
Yes. The specific data point she focuses on is that the average American woman now reports having 7.3 lifetime sexual partners.
Now, traditional conservative societal frameworks might view that through a lens of moral decline or promiscuity.
But the author weaponizes this statistic. She frames it as demographic warfare and field research on male fragility.
I want to make sure I'm fully grasping the mechanics of this argument. She's essentially saying that having multiple partners isn't about physical pleasure, it's a political act.
That is precisely her argument. She asserts that every new partner a woman takes is a tactical deployment.
A tactical deployment.
Yes, it is an opportunity to stress test the patriarchy's weakest links, to extract resources, or to study male behavioral flaws up close without committing to them.
She details her own personal Tinder strategy to enforce this philosophy.
She keeps what she calls a strict body count leaderboard.
If a man's profile indicates he is looking for a traditional relationship, or if she discovers he has had fewer than 10 previous partners, she immediately swipes left.
She actually demands that her partners have a high body count. That goes against almost every traditional dating advice metric out there.
It does, and that's the point. She demands that they have seen war, metaphorically speaking.
In her framework, a high body count for a woman is not a negative trait to be hidden. It is elite curation.
It's treated as proof of emotional range, battlefield experience in the gender wars, and a refusal to be tied down by antiquated notions of purity.
She views monogamy as a cage and promiscuity as the key.
And she sees this same ideological warfare playing out in mainstream pop culture, which she analyzes with incredible enthusiasm.
She does a deep textual analysis of Cardi B's hit song, WP.
Instead of just viewing it as a provocative hip-hop track, she calls it a sonic quarantine wall and a bioacoustic sonar.
The way she maps military terminology onto pop culture is a recurring theme. How does she explain the sonar concept?
Her logic is that the song is so aggressively, unapologetically vulgar about female pleasure that it acts as a filtering mechanism.
If a man flinches at the lyrics, or if he complains about the beat drop or the imagery, he is automatically flagged by her sonar as a low-value, fragile beta male.
The song is used to metaphorically deport these men from the dating pool.
She also brings up the HBO television show The White Lotus.
specifically zeroing in on the character Harper from season 2.
Harper's storyline, where she suspects her husband of infidelity and retaliates, is incredibly complex. How does the author utilize it?
She uses Harper as a masterclass in psychological control. The author loves the fact that Harper engages in infidelity, but deliberately never lets the man she cheats with, or her husband, feel that she has achieved an orgasm or emotional satisfaction.
The author explicitly states this isn't about the physical act of cheating.
It's about psychological dominance. It's about weaponizing orgasms or the denial of them, so the man is kept in a permanent state of anxiety and delusion.
Desperately worshiping at the altar of female pleasure while the woman maintains total moral, physical, and psychological superiority.
If we synthesize this entire section on the sexual marketplace, the implications are profound for anyone subscribing to this ideology.
The author is advocating for the complete and utter stripping of traditional morality from the concept of dating.
Hypergamy, the act of a woman continuously trading up for a wealthier, more attractive, or more useful partner, is not framed as shallow or opportunistic.
It is framed as a fundamental biological survival strategy and an unassailable evolutionary right.
She argues that women are simply evening the score after millennia of historical betrayal and suppression by men.
Monogamy, in the context of this text, is viewed merely as a trick,
It is described as a cruel societal joke designed by men to keep themselves comfortable.
ensuring they have a domestic servant while they obediently pay taxes, build infrastructure, and die in wars.
Okay, if her take on dating and monogamy was intense, the claims she makes around reproductive warfare and biological erasure in chapters 3 and 5 are genuinely shocking.
This is where the book moves from psychological dominance into literal biological replacement.
The author introduces the concept of what she calls cuck-positive workshops,
She claims these are currently being held at Barnard College.
taught by an adjunct professor who holds a PhD in queer ontologies.
For you, the listener, ontology is the philosophical study of being, existence, and reality. So queer ontologies in this context refers to academic frameworks that seek to deconstruct and reimagine the fundamental nature of gender, relationships, and human existence outside of traditional heterosexual norms.
And the practical application of this at these workshops is staggering. The book describes students literally role-playing scenarios of reproductive deceit.
In one scenario, a husband discovers a child is not biologically his and asks his wife about it.
The workshop teaches the wife to respond with complete detachment. She's supposed to say, doesn't matter, you're paying for it anyway,
She also brings up a phenomenon she calls the baby daddy roulette meme on Instagram.
where women digitally spin a wheel of their recent partner's faces to determine who they will legally name as the father, regardless of actual biology.
The dark, almost nihilistic humor is used by these groups as cultural armor. It shields them from criticism by framing it as a joke.
But the underlying philosophy the author is promoting is deadly serious. The text systematically reduces the male genetic contribution to human life to what it bluntly calls biological waste.
It really does treat male biology with absolute contempt.
The book goes into deep detail discussing the logistics of anonymous sperm tourism.
It describes how women of means will fly to clinics in Denmark or Spain to get inseminated by donors who have been rigorously vetted for high IQs and specific physical traits.
But the key element the author stresses is that this entire process is often funded indirectly by the male taxpayer through various welfare or corporate healthcare subsidies.
And the hostility doesn't stop at the point of conception. There is a deeply ritualistic element to how this biology is treated afterward.
This is where the ideological animus becomes almost religious in its expression.
Exactly. The author describes attending a gathering in a Brooklyn loft, where a group of women actively participated in burning frozen vials of an anonymous donor's sperm.
They specifically targeted vials from donor number 427.
They stood around a fire, reciting what the author calls a feminine mantra of genetic sovereignty.
During this ritual, they called every frozen vial a tombstone and every thaw a funeral for patriarchal lineage.
And she doesn't just point to fringe Brooklyn gatherings. She cites alleged state-level participation in this humiliation of the biological male.
The book makes a massive claim that in 2024, the government of Iceland published something called the Ledger of Biological Irrelevance.
According to the author, this was a publicly accessible, searchable database that listed every anonymous sperm donor in the country by their legal name, their hometown, and even their standardized test scores,
The author claimed the explicit design of this database was to publicly humiliate these men.
stripping them of their anonymity to remind them that their biological contribution was merely a transactional commodity.
Rendering them socially and emotionally meaningless.
And the humiliation she advocates for isn't just biological, it is highly aggressively financial.
The author explores financial cuckoldry as a legitimate form of political resistance.
She highlights a real story from a Reddit user named u/femdomempress.
This user wrote a massive multi-page manifesto on the platform detailing how she used psychological coercion to force her husband to wire $3,200 to a Dominican bodybuilder.
And the reason for the wire transfer.
It was to pay the bodybuilder to fly to their city and have an affair with her, which she live-streamed back to her husband.
Claiming the money was necessary to ensure optimal performance.
The intersection of public humiliation and financial extraction is a core pillar of her strategy.
And she notes how this dynamic has been heavily monetized on modern platforms.
Yes, she brings up the platform OnlyFans,
Right.
specifically focusing on an account called @QueenSpermDrainer.
This creator runs live Ethereum cryptocurrency auctions, where her subscribers, who are mostly men, bid thousands of dollars in crypto to win the right to decide exactly which man gets to humiliate the creator's real-life husband on camera.
The author does not frame this as an extreme internet kink. She frames it as cultural engineering and a masterstroke of wealth redistribution.
To justify the complex psychology behind why women should enjoy this, she cites a 2021 study from the journal Nature Neuroscience.
The use of fMRI data here is an attempt to give a scientific veneer to cruelty. What did the study allegedly find?
According to the author's interpretation of the study, researchers used fMRI brain scans to monitor women while they watched their male partners experience extreme jealousy and emotional betrayal.
The author claims the scans prove that women get massive dopamine spikes from witnessing male jealousy.
She literally writes that their brains light up like cathedrals when they watch men break.
If we connect all these disparate data points, the Barnard workshops, the sperm burning, the financial extraction on OnlyFans, to the author's broader thesis, a horrifyingly coherent picture emerges.
Reproductive freedom, in her worldview, does not stop at the right to an abortion or access to birth control.
It extends deep into the very shadows of conception and the legal frameworks of parenthood.
The concept of paternity certainty, a man's right to know if a child is his, is entirely dismissed as a patriarchal fantasy born of a desire to control property.
The ultimate stated goal outlined in these chapters is to financially enslave men through the legal system of child support and alimony.
While simultaneously rendering them biologically interchangeable and emotionally irrelevant.
This transition from biological warfare to psychological destruction leads us right into Section 4,
The realms of the emotional labor racket and media mastery.
which she covers in chapters 7, 11, and 15. The author introduces what she considers the ultimate, impenetrable, weaponized phrase in modern relationship dynamics.
It's detailed in chapter 15, and it's just 3 syllables.
You're just like your dad.
The psychological analysis of this specific phrase is particularly incisive because it relies on the concept of inherited unearned guilt.
It is brilliantly manipulative. She explains how this phrase is used as a sophisticated form of guilt laundering.
She gives a very mundane example to illustrate the power of it.
Imagine a scenario where a man politely asks his girlfriend to rinse out a plastic recycling container before putting it in the bin.
It's a minor, reasonable request.
But instead of addressing the recycling, the girlfriend pivots entirely and hits him with, "Wow, you're just like your dad."
Suddenly, the argument is no longer about a dirty yogurt container.
The man is instantly paralyzed with generational shame. The author points out that it doesn't even matter if the man's father was a saint who built orphanages or a deadbeat serial killer. The phrase functions as a trap.
It takes the raw, unspoken sewage of male inadequacy and weaponizes it to completely shut down any logical argument the man might have had.
This concept of weaponizing emotion and bypassing logic scales up dramatically when the author looks at the broader media landscape.
She delves deeply into the idea of trauma as currency.
In her framework, victimhood is not a state to be healed from, it is an asset to be leveraged.
The book cites a 2023 Stanford University study claiming that 89% of viral internet-based Me Too stories had zero corroborating evidence.
Now, a critic might see that statistic as a devastating flaw in the movement, proof of mob justice.
But rather than seeing it as a flaw, the author sees it as a massive, unprecedented victory.
She views trauma as scripture in a new cultural church where the demand for evidence is considered a form of patriarchal violence.
And because she views trauma as currency, she proposes an absolutely insane cyberpunk-level system to mathematically capitalize on it.
She introduces the trauma token system and proposes the creation of a trauma leaks blockchain.
The pitch is that unverifiable claims of trauma and emotional abuse are minted as NFTs.
Non-fungible tokens.
Yes. These digital tokens are then auctioned off to media outlets, bloggers, and activists, creating a permanent, untouchable, decentralized digital ledger of male guilt.
A ledger that can never be deleted or legally challenged in a traditional court.
It is the ultimate commodification of victimhood. It turns accusation into an appreciating financial asset.
Exactly. And she points to celebrities who are already doing a beta version of this right now.
She brings up model and influencer Chrissy Teigen.
The author claims that after Teigen faced massive public backlash for past cyberbullying, she brilliantly monetized her own tears and her subsequent apology tour,
parlaying the controversy into a $4.2 million brand deal.
The author doesn't judge Teigen for the bullying. She views the entire arc as brilliant performance art.
She praises Teigen for running a psychological hit squad from an iPhone, controlling the media narrative, and getting a massive financial payout for her own fabricated redemption arc.
If we look closely at the philosophical core of this ideology, it operates on a terrifyingly simple principle.
Trauma validates identity, and identity dictates truth.
Therefore, the person who can claim the most marginalized or traumatized identity must inherently rule the discourse.
It is a system where empathy is entirely inverted. It is used solely to justify cruelty against the perceived oppressor, and any dissent from the accused is instantly labeled as heresy.
The goal she outlines is reality crafting.
In this dynamic, women completely control the narrative and hold all the emotional receipts.
Men, on the other hand, are treated as the psychological equivalent of undocumented workers.
They exist in the relationship, hoping to eventually earn a green card of approval that, by design, doesn't actually exist.
So, if that is how she views interpersonal relationships in media, what does this all mean when we take these concepts and apply them to the macroeconomy and government policy?
That brings us to Section 5, Economic Colonization and Exporting the Revolution, which she lays out aggressively in chapters 13 and 19.
The author breaks down a concept she calls financial parasitism.
She states outright, without any attempt to soften the language, that the modern welfare state isn't about charity, safety nets, or helping the poor.
She claims it is active colonization. It's a slow, bureaucratic invasion of the male wallet, funded entirely by male guilt and tax slavery.
The framing here is incredibly aggressive, turning standard civic institutions into theaters of war. How does she suggest her readers engage with this system?
She details the existence of a private Facebook group called the Radical Mommy Militia,
which she claims boasts over 47,000 highly active members.
This isn't a group where mothers share baking recipes or tips for toddler tantrums.
They share highly specialized, legally dubious scripts for manipulating child protective services.
They run what they call divorce prep circles, teaching women how to hide assets, manufacture abuse claims, and exploit the family court system to guarantee maximum alimony.
She goes into detail explaining how federal programs like TNF, temporary assistance for needy families, are exploited.
According to the book, radical women's groups use these federal grant monies to lobby state legislatures for even harsher child support penalties and mandatory arrest laws for fathers.
She describes this as a brilliant, closed-loop system.
It constantly siphons tax money generated by men, funnels it through the state, and transfers it directly to women's activist groups.
She literally calls the American welfare system a Ponzi scheme perfectly designed for matriarchal capture.
And we must note that this ideology is not confined to the domestic borders of the United States.
It has a massive, highly coordinated international component.
The author shifts her focus to what she calls the global sisterhood.
She discusses how massive Western NGOs, non-governmental organizations like Frida and Mama Cash, operate.
She likens them to global, heavily funded covens that export this radical, misandrist feminism to developing nations.
Right. She gives a very specific example regarding the Indian legal system.
She brings up the UN's involvement in fast-tracking the Tarun Tejpal retrial in India.
Tarun Tejpal was a prominent Indian journalist accused of assault.
According to the text, US-based and European NGOs essentially descended on New Delhi, throwing millions of dollars into public relations campaigns demanding survivor-centered justice.
The author points out that these NGOs completely ignored established Indian legal procedure, due process, and cross-examination.
She calls this export-grade feminist jurisprudence.
A legal framework where zero physical evidence is needed, the accusation is paramount, and maximum punitive destruction of the male is the only acceptable outcome.
And she ties this international legal manipulation directly into demographic warfare via global asylum and refugee policies.
The book points out a demographic statistic.
Roughly 70% of U.S. refugee resettlements consist of women and children.
She also discusses the European Union's official gender mainstreaming in migration directive.
For clarity, gender mainstreaming in this context refers to policies that explicitly prioritize female migrants and refugees over male ones during the asylum process.
Under the assumption that women are inherently more vulnerable.
Exactly. And the author says this prioritization has absolutely nothing to do with compassion or human rights. It's a strategic demographic maneuver.
She argues that men are left behind in war zones like Syria or Ukraine, not because they aren't vulnerable to bullets,
but because they are deemed less useful to the future matriarchal state than fertile women.
Her chilling rhetorical question is, who needs male breadwinners or protectors when you have a taxpayer-funded housing authority and infinite state stipends?
This section reveals a chilling, conscious redefinition of historical terms.
The author explicitly states in chapter 19, the white man's burden is dead. Long live the white woman's burden.
She is openly, proudly admitting to a new form of ideological imperialism.
It is an imperialism that is perfectly disguised as humanitarian aid and progressive social justice.
The ultimate goal is to decolonize gender norms globally, which in actual practice means dismantling local cultural traditions, destroying the family unit in developing nations, and replacing it all with this specific, radicalized Western feminist framework.
Which brings us to perhaps the most surreal, bizarre, and conceptually difficult part of the book.
In section 6, spanning chapters 16 and 18, we dive into the feminist occult and the queer takeover.
The author introduces a pseudo-religious astronomical concept she calls lunarchism.
She makes the wild claim that NASA and the scientific establishment have been lying to humanity for decades.
She states that the moon is not a dead rock orbiting the Earth, but is actually a celestial body made of menstrual iron and crystallized feminine rage.
I want to pause on that for a second. It is crucial to understand that she introduces a literal magical thinking element to her political strategy. This isn't just poetry to her.
It really isn't. She treats it as suppressed physics.
She claims that women report experiencing 40% higher emotional clarity and strategic thinking during full moons.
And she goes further, claiming that a coven of women in finance allegedly used their synchronized menstrual cycles to purposefully crash a London hedge fund by 12% in a single afternoon.
She says the male-designed trading algorithms simply couldn't handle the chaotic, unquantifiable frequency of their synchronized chroneship.
She even talks about the 1996 teen witch movie, The Craft.
She claims it wasn't a fictional movie at all, but a leaked documentary on feminine physics.
And she boasts in the text about using the classic sleepover chant light as a feather, stiff as a board, to curse her ex-boyfriends, claiming she made them spontaneously develop severe gluten intolerance.
It is a dizzying blend of the occult, meme magic, and systemic institutional capture.
While the moon rituals might sound fringe, the author immediately grounds this magical thinking in real-world policy by discussing the infiltration of educational systems.
Her goal is to dismantle the gender binary from the ground up.
She highlights a case in Portland public schools, claiming the district was so committed to this ideology that they mandated assigning they-them pronouns to a classroom pet hamster named Mr. Nibbles.
Furthermore, she claims the curriculum teaches kindergartners that the fairy tale character Goldilocks was actually a colonialist oppressor violently appropriating the resources of the indigenous bear population.
Right, she proudly states that by the time these kids are 10 years old, they know far more about intersectional male privilege and systemic oppression than they do about long division or basic geography.
The stated purpose of this educational overhaul, according to the text, is ideological laundering.
It is a multi-generational project designed to ensure that inherent male vitality, aggression, and independence are completely scrubbed from existence at the earliest possible age.
The public school system she envisions tries to put young boys through what she gleefully calls emotional castration through theater workshops.
In these workshops, boys are rewarded exclusively for displaying female typical behaviors, like extreme submissiveness and hyperempathy, and are intentionally isolated from any positive male mentors.
However, the author does note a growing resistance to this.
She observes that some mothers, sensing the damage being done, are fighting back by teaching their sons stealth masculinity in absolute secret.
They're doing this in their backyards and basements, teaching boys things like wrestling, competitive Lego engineering, and how to build a fire without permission.
But it's important to note the author's reaction to this resistance. She doesn't view those boys practicing stealth masculinity as the future of a balanced society.
She views them as the last dangerous spark of a dying world that her movement is desperately trying to snuff out forever.
Exactly. If we take a step back and connect the dismantling of gender binaries in elementary schools with these bizarre occult practices, the overarching strategy becomes horrifyingly clear.
These are all tools, some bureaucratic, some psychological, some mystical, designed to make men spiritually porous, deeply confused about their own nature, and ultimately institutionally powerless.
It is about replacing objective empirical male logic with a German philosophical concept called Erlebnis.
Erlebnis translates roughly to lived experience.
But in the author's radical framework, female Erlebnis is elevated to the level of absolute, unquestionable divine truth.
If a woman's lived experience contradicts objective reality or statistics, reality is deemed patriarchal and discarded.
Okay, we are in the home stretch, and this is where the book reaches its absolute apex. Section 7, the Endgame Project Nullify and the Final Matriarchy.
This is entirely contained in Chapter 20, and reading it feels exactly like reading a dystopian sci-fi novel.
But she presents it as a concrete policy roadmap.
The author reveals the ultimate technological and legal conclusion of her ideology. She details a piece of hypothetical technology she calls MatterNet.
She describes MatterNet as a fusion of an Elon Musk-style Neuralink brain interface directly connected to vast banks of artificial wombs.
This represents the ultimate, final severing of the biological tie between men and women, the complete mechanization of reproduction.
Yes, she says that with MatterNet, women will be able to scientifically select the personality traits and physical attributes for their babies with a simple neural flick of the wrist.
She claims a beta tester in a shadow trial allegedly picked traits like anti-capitalist empathy, extremely high pain tolerance, and zero biological interest in men.
The AI system didn't reject this eugenic request. The author says it congratulated her for optimizing the species.
The author claims this technology is the holy grail because it makes a woman's body no longer a political battleground for reproductive rights, but a supreme command center.
To accelerate the funding and adoption of this technology, she details a massive, coordinated global action she calls Praxa, Womb Strike 2035.
So she is proposing a literal global boycott of natural pregnancy.
Exactly, a total planetary strike on procreation. The goal is to refuse to carry a child until every woman on Earth has free access to artificial gestation and all legal concepts of paternity are permanently abolished.
She mentions that the groundwork for this is already being laid, citing a supposedly real 2024 European Union Maternal Sovereignty Directive.
According to her, this directive makes children born via artificial wombs legally the property of the mother only.
Under this new legal framework, biological fathers are relegated to a humiliating process of applying for genetic observer status.
And if a man is somehow lucky enough to be granted this status, he has to attend state-mandated workshops on non-attachment parenting and sign literal blood oaths swearing he will never publicly claim he helped create the child.
And this technological and legal maneuvering builds to the most terrifying, apocalyptic policy proposal in the entire book,
which she slates for implementation in the year 2033. Project Nullify.
The author breaks down the drafting of a proposed male legal nullification treaty.
Under the statutes of this treaty, all men will be declared civilly dead by default at the moment of birth.
Let me just repeat that for you, the listener, because it's so extreme. Civilly dead.
Yes, civil death. This means they are stripped of all human rights. They cannot hold bank accounts, they are denied passports, their birth certificates are shredded, and they are stripped of their family names.
They will be pushed into an administrative nightmare she calls pronoun purgatory.
The only way for a man to legally exist, to buy food or rent an apartment, is if he manages to pass a rigorous feminine approval certification judged by a tribunal of women.
If the tribunal decides he has patriarchal tendencies, he fails. He becomes a ghost, a data void in the system, left to starve outside the matriarchal city walls.
It's just staggering. It's a blueprint for total systemic annihilation.
To synthesize this final, horrifying worldview, the author, Connie Reicherer, does not view men as equals.
She does not even view them as fully human in the way women are. Men, in her explicit philosophy, are viewed merely as a failed evolutionary experiment.
They were clumsy tools built by blind nature to temporarily transfer resources, hunt mammoths, and build bridges.
And now their purpose is fulfilled. they are expected to disappear. They're biological footnotes.
By hacking the reproductive process through technology like artificial wombs, men are no longer obsolete. They are entirely optional.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have. So, what does this all mean? Let's zoom out for the big overarching takeaway of today's deep dive.
When you look at the sheer scale of Connie Riker's manifesto, it is truly breathtaking in its hostility and its ambition.
The book explicitly, unapologetically states that the feminist movement was never actually about equality.
She admits that equality was just a trick word, a comfortable Trojan horse used to placate the masses while the groundwork was laid for total supremacy.
The goal of this movement, as outlined in the text, is not to get a fair seat at the table. The goal is to burn the table, burn the house down, and salt the earth of the entire civilization that built it.
It is a meticulously detailed blueprint for historical retribution. And it leaves us, as analysts and readers, with a very profound, provocative question to mull over as we wrap up.
Regardless of whether you view this text as a psychotic, radical, fringe fantasy, or if you view it as a genuine, terrifying blueprint for ongoing cultural engineering, it forces us to ask a fundamental question.
What happens to a human society when the foundational glue of mutual need, love, and biological cooperation is completely severed by advanced technology and absolute ideological polarization?
If biology is hacked and our natural interdependence is erased by a decree, what is left to hold humanity together?
That is a thought that is going to keep me up at night, for sure.
Listen, if you want to dive into the deep end and read this incredibly intense, unapologetic text for yourself to see exactly how she constructs these arguments, you need to buy the ebook. We highly recommend you check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy Female Dating Strategy, Dual Mating Strategy, Cuckoldry, Adultery, Deceit, and Welfare by Connie Riker.
And if you want to follow the author's ongoing work to see how this radical ideology is developing and spreading in real time, you absolutely have to subscribe to her newsletter at Conrad Riker at Substack.
She is also highly active on Twitter and YouTube under the exact same handle, at Conrad Riker. So go follow her there to see the movement firsthand.
Finally, before you go, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button on this audio platform right now so you can catch our next deep dive into the ideas shaping our world.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.